Let's talk about storytelling in gacha games. Specifically, I want to talk about Genshin and Wuthering Waves' way of storytelling. This is not about the lore or the story itself, this is about how they're telling the story. And this is also just a casual perspective from a casual player, how I have experienced both of these games' stories. What I did enjoy and what I did not enjoy. I'm simply a gamer. If I get bored during a story, I stop playing. It's that simple. And let's be real, making stories in live service must be hard freaking work, because that story is being made in time pressure, it has to deliver and should give players, in the best case scenario, a somewhat cinematic experience. But now, what is actually good storytelling? I think that's pretty hard to define. I would rather ask, what is bad storytelling? Because if you know what players don't like, often leads to making better content. Storytelling can actually quite ruin a whole story. You could even say that storytelling most of the time is more important than the story itself. It's the experience that matters the most. Now, taking a look at examples to determine what's bad and what's good. And the first example I want to use here is Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact is a live service gacha game. It makes billions of dollars each year, but most of its storytelling is literally dialogue. The story is filled to the brim with yapping, which should not be a problem if done right. Well, that's the thing. WUWA, who created their flagship billion-dollar title, Genshin Impact, has barely improved actually on the storytelling aspect, even after 5 live service years. When you start a story in that game, you can expect 90% of the story is literally just dialogue, barely cutscenes, and a lot of running from A to B, and sometimes you have a fight here and there. I would say the balance just from dialogue, combat, cutscenes, and animations is just completely off in this game. Some would even say it's like 80% dialogue, maybe 5% cutscenes, and then 15% combat, or something like that. And while most of the dialogue is actually voice acted, the dialogues themselves a lot of times feel very dragged out. Characters during these dialogues are also very inanimatic, meaning there is barely any body gestures, barely expressions, and the fact that the camera is also barely doing any movement makes a lot of the dialogue just very exhausting to watch. Sometimes they don't even try to deliver visually the story itself, making use of black screens with white text a lot of times instead. But still, a lot of players swear on the story of Genshin, because a lot of the lore is actually quite good, but it's hidden between yapping and books that you can find and read for days. A lot of players have been saying this for years, that Genshin Impact lacks in giving players the proper story experience. While the idea is pretty cool, the delivery oftentimes is just lacking. Putting in scope the revenue that this game is making between 30 and 100 million a month, is quite surprising when the story actually looks like this. As I said, they use these black screens with white text quite often, which just proves that sometimes these animators are just too lazy to create a cutscene, maybe an artwork, or a small animation for it. Even epic fighting scenes get that treatment sometime. I want to show you guys this little scene where Dan Sleeve, a very important character, is fighting someone quite important. Watch this.
貴様を100度だって殺してやる。
It's quite obvious that sometimes they use tricks like this so they don't have to make animations for these quests, because it probably would be a lot of work to animate that fighting scene. A lot of the times the quality of the quest seems quite inconsistent in Genshin. Sometimes they actually put quite a lot of effort in making dialogue more engaging. For example, the Fontaine quest, which probably had one of the best ways of storytelling, which was very much showcased in Furina's trial quest. But then in other times, in Netland for example, the newest zone, a lot of the times characters are simply just standing there and barely nothing happens visually on the screen. So for me it seems like they actually can do a better job in making the quests more visually appealing, but apparently most of the time they're not doing it. Because here you can see that they use quite a lot of different camera angles, more movement in the characters, and even quite some artworks and expressions being used, making the quest just more pleasant to experience. Sadly, this quality is just very rarely seen in Genshin's quests, but they are able to do that if they want to. So most of the time during Genshin's quests, your screen will actually look like this. And for some of the quests, they take up to 6 hours or more. So you can imagine that actually quite a lot of people quit this game simply because of the storytelling. Since Genshin's story is actually one of the biggest selling points for the game, you could expect that they actually put some effort into these quests. But it seems like that players are still spending a lot of money and time into this game, so the developers probably don't have to improve on it, which is quite a shame. And probably one of the worst things in this game is that it still has no skip button. Many gacha games have this skip button to value players' time. Especially when players don't enjoy the quest or the story, they can just simply choose to skip. A lazy made story that they can skip sounds pretty good, right? But no, in Genshin you have to endure endless dialogue sometimes between 5 and 12 hours long. Especially one of the quests, the Aranara quest, which kind of turned into a meme, is such a showcase of this. This actually led to a lot of traumatic experiences for players to play this boring mess of a quest. It's quite sad. Another bad thing is just the lack of quality when it comes to NPCs that you interact with during the quests. These really throw players a lot of times from the immersion. A lot of them look lazily done and look so much worse than the playable units. Sometimes you see those characters interact with each other with NPCs, and while the playable units look nice, the NPCs next to them look so bad in comparison. Not only that, but they also reuse NPCs a lot of times. They simply do color changes at the outfit, maybe the hair color, maybe they change the hairstyle, but they leave the face and the body type. And this goes as far as putting them into main quests, which really throws off the player's immersion. This, in my opinion, is definitely a part of bad storytelling, since it can ruin the whole experience being like, hey, haven't I seen this NPC before? Isn't it this guy? Oh wait, he has a different hair color now. Never mind. Nonetheless, the ending of most art conquests are actually quite cinematic, and the story itself, actually on paper, is quite interesting. But compared to the 95% of yapping to get to the climax of the story, it's just very boring. Like, don't get me wrong, I do like some of the cutscenes, especially in the climaxes of the stories. But as I said, sometimes it feels like you endure hours of dialogue to actually get to the good part. And you most of the time don't even enjoy during the playthrough to get there. Now let's drift off from Genshin and let's talk about Wuthering Waves. Just keep in mind, it will sound like I'm bashing Genshin Impact a lot, but I feel like somebody has to point these things out, because maybe future developers or somebody watching this has to actually understand what players actually might like better. Because I also hope that future gacha developers will take inspiration of how Wuthering Waves is telling the story. Because what players have experienced in Wuthering Waves is something that is on a different level. WUWA's storytelling is fantastic. It offers a lot of cutscenes and great combat cinematics. Now, Kuru Games, which is actually the developer of Wuthering Waves, their approach is actually quite interesting, because they do value the player's time. They actually say this quite a lot. They want players to feel like they're actually having fun. And you actually get to feel this approach from the developers when you start playing this game. And if players are bored, they can actually just use the skip button and skip whole dialogues or even cutscenes if they want to. Because skip buttons are there for a reason. Some might say, oh no, having a skip button is bad, because now I won't be forced reading the story, and the skip button looks so tempting now. That's literally comments that I got from Genshin players, by the way. But Kuru Games' approach is different and very inspiring for maybe upcoming future developers. They want to challenge the players and themselves by having a skip button. They want you to dare to press that skip button, because you're gonna feel like you might even miss out of one of the most cinematic dialogues or cutscenes if you do that.
Unshakable!
Damn!
We ride with roar.
What the was that? So players actually sometimes don't skip because they are afraid to miss out. That's a very interesting approach, since Wuthering Waves has also redefined what dialogues and real camera work looks like. Dialogue compared to Genshin is just way shorter and more compact, and the camera movement is very engaging and keeps the players hooked. a lot of the times. Especially the expressiveness of the characters' faces and the body gestures is on a different level. While Genshin characters barely move, Wuthering Waves characters feel like they are alive and have very natural movements, like they're actually talking to someone. Expressive faces is one of these features they actually seem to enhance on every patch. Like, storytelling is even getting better with each update. One thing that I was always missing in Genshin Impact, to be honest. Because you can look at Genshin's 1.0 storytelling and look at it now, it almost looks the same. So Wuthering Waves makes dialogue themselves quite entertaining to watch now. Watching dialogue is sometimes so expressive and animated that it almost makes it look like you are watching a cutscene. They also offer you quicktime events and even optional decision making to make the quest even more enticing. And in Genshin, a lot of times it feels like you have to get to the good part to be entertained, which is a huge difference to Wuthering Waves because you're pretty much entertained consistently during the whole playthrough, just because everything is so much more animated and the dialogues are just so much more fun to watch. And Wuthering Waves really takes a lot of inspiration of how anime tells stories. Using this technique, some dialogues are also quite comedic. They also lean in a lot into the characters' personalities and even give you a little chuckle once in a while to grab also players' attention. While Genshin also sometimes tries to be funny, a lot of the times the jokes just cannot hit because of the lack of body gestures and the expressions of the faces. Now, this is a lot of critique on Genshin, right? But honestly, somebody has to do it. This is to inform and showcase how maybe in the future developers can actually learn from each other. Stories should be told in a way that it's respecting players' time, especially when these developers make so much money. Saying it's simply just a 5-year-old game, and that's the reason why the storytelling is lacking, is just a lazy excuse. Because we have seen that they can do it. And honestly, Genshin's story should get the treatment it deserves. I think it's actually quite disrespectful to the IP itself, because the lore itself actually seems really interesting. It's just being held back of the way of its storytelling. Zenless is also using the same engine like Genshin. That game is making improvements quite a lot. ZZZ also has quite unique looking NPCs, and they just look so much better compared to Genshin's NPCs. Music is also a big part in these games, and I do think that these two games are actually doing quite a good job when it comes to the music and immersiveness. But Wuthering Waves has really mastered the way of putting lyrical songs during their cutscenes and animations. Just take a look at this and how it's like catching the moment and adding so much to the atmosphere of this scene.
May applause greet you, heroes of Septimonth.
That was crazy.
In the storms are tides of blood and sand. Your sword stitches our land.
Giving players somewhat of a wow effect when they play some of the quests. So Genshin can learn a lot from that. It could enhance on storytelling quite a bit. They should make NPCs more unique and better looking. The camera movement just needs so much more work. Also, dialogues and some of the sentences that NPCs say are just so long many times. So these should also be more concise. Also, players keep complaining about Paimon a lot because a lot of the times when Paimon speaks, she's literally just summarizing or repeating something that we just have heard or already read before, dragging dialogues even more out. Characters should also just be more expressive and move during dialogues. Make them feel more alive, rather than just being standing ragdolls. Of course, a skip button, while it seems unlikely, but it just has great value to players. Especially a skip button would make sense when developers cannot make a decent job delivering a good story experience. But I don't want to make this video too long, so I will stop here. It's easy to say, WUWA has probably learned a lot also from Genshin, what players like and what they don't like during stories. And they have been enhancing on that. And they just don't stop improving it either. They even go as far to ask what players enjoy during feedback surveys, and they actually listen, which Genshin barely did the last couple of years. But I'm curious about Genshin 6.0 and not cry if they are improving on any of that. But I guess we will see. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a bit of a different one, but I thought it's very interesting to just talk about that. Leave in the comment section what is your thoughts, what does good storytelling look like for you? Let's have a little conversation. Join our Discord server if you want to share some of your thoughts. And of course, subscribe for more videos, and thank you all for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.